Evening, a beautiful evening with largely clear skies and staying that way overnight as well. Temperatures will drop down with those clear skies and light winds. We'll keep some outbreaks of rain going across northern parts of Scotland. Into tomorrow, and it's a very similar day actually. We'll see again plenty of blue sky across England, Wales, much of southern and eastern Scotland, bit of showery rain across the far northeast, and always some rain at times close to the Western Isles and the west coast. Maybe a bit more cloud pushing into Northern Ireland with a small chance of a shower here, but we should see sunny spells in Belfast and temperatures ticking up higher by tomorrow. We're looking more widely into the mid-20s across England and Wales, maybe 28 across the southeast. That's 82 in Fahrenheit. Again, cooler in the northwest where these weather fronts persist. The high pressure, though, still dominant for most through the rest of this week as it ekes eastwards. Hotter air arrives with temperatures set to peak across England and Wales on Friday, over 30 Celsius in some places.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akweer on your TV, radio and online.
Now we're with you until midday, again bringing you today's biggest stories with expert guests and our take on them.
Yes, and we'd also like to hear your opinions, your takes, so get them in on our usual email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Right, and that's all coming up, but before that, here's your latest news headlines.
A very good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, the Foreign Secretary has defended government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after criticism from religious leaders. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York have called the measures immoral, and they say they shamed Britain. The first plane is expected to leave the UK today with up to 11 people on board. There were some legal challenges that failed yesterday. At least 3 further court cases are expected to be brought forward today. Liz Truss, though, told GB News the government is determined that the flight leaves today.
Home Secretary is absolutely determined to push ahead with this policy. It's the right thing to do. The people who are immoral here are the people traffickers, trying to trade in lives, damaging people, potentially seeing people perish in the English Channel. So it's very important we act. The flight is going to leave today, and if people aren't on today's flight, then they will be on subsequent flights.
The Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the scheme is unworkable, it's too expensive, and it's not very British.
There's a huge backlog at the moment, which is partly why people are coming to this country, are here for years waiting for applications to be processed. So those that don't have a right to stay in this country aren't being sent back. We wouldn't be cutting the National Crime Agency budget by 20%, the very agency that is there to tackle these smuggling gangs. And we would make it illegal for these gangs to advertise their wares, essentially, on social media.
Well, on another significant story today, Liz Truss says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against the UK after the government set out its plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The European Commission has threatened to take legal action against the UK. But the Foreign Secretary says the changes don't make the EU any worse off and new plans protect the single market. The UK government claims the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel from the rest of Great Britain. But Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney warned the plans could destabilise the situation in Northern Ireland. The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to now 29.6 million. Wages, though, have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. It's figures from the ONS that show that while employment is rising, the figure still remains below pre-pandemic levels. More than 1,000 patients a day were spending 12 hours or longer in accident and emergency in England last year. It's a report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, who used Freedom of Information requests to gather the information, described as alarming, they said the numbers were. They say the NHS doesn't have enough staff to provide necessary services and that patient safety has never been at greater risk. Thousands more railway workers are to be balloted for industrial action, threatening to cause even more travel disruption for passengers this summer. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association has served notice to ballot more than 6,000 staff at Network Rail. It's in disputes over pay, conditions and job security. It's the same dispute that's behind the RMT and the ASLEF national rail strikes planned for later this month and next. A series of memorial events will be held today to mark the 5th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. A service will be held at Westminster Abbey this morning, where the names of all 72 men, women and children who died will be read out. The Abbey bell will also toll 72 times. Local resident Joe Delaney says his memory of the night was chaos.
It did just strike me as awfully confused, and even when councillors turned up, it was just as confusing then, because no one knew where to go. You know, people had to sleep rough in the shadow of that tower as it burned for 26 hours, I think, in total, as their loved ones were still in there dying. You know, that's going to have an effect on people, and it has had an effect on people.
Veterans of the Falklands War will mark the 40th anniversary of the end of the conflict with a service today. On this day in 1982, the Argentinians surrendered after weeks of fighting. 255 British troops were killed. The Royal British Legion has invited thousands of veterans and bereaved family members to the event at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
A very good morning. The time's 10:05 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Maroki, and Nana Queer on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's on the menu today.
Right, so the first deportations of channel migrants will begin today as the first plane looks set to jet off to Rwanda. But Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says that this plan will make human trafficking and smuggling worse. We look into whether that's true in just a moment.
Yes, and Grenfell victims are still searching for justice 5 years on from that devastating fire that killed 72 people. Our London reporter Alice Porter will tell their stories. She's been on the ground.
And finally, more foreign teachers look set to be able to teach in English schools without retraining in the UK. Is this the solution to the school staffing shortage? We'll ask a head teacher later on.
Yes, that's all coming up on the programme today and much more as well. We're here till midday as usual, and you can get in touch with your views at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
So the first Rwanda-bound airplane carrying some of Britain's illegal Channel migrants will set out off later today after a last-ditch attempt to stop the flight was rejected by the Court of Appeal.
Yes, but the plane will be carrying just 7 or 8 people after many won legal cases to remain in the UK, meaning they will not be taking off on that flight. 3 of those 7 are still planning legal challenges against their deportation this morning before the flight leaves this afternoon.
Our reporter Ellie Costello is outside the Home Office now. Ellie, so is this flight even going to take off at all? I mean, what's the feeling there?
Well, there is a plane expected to go to the Rwandan capital, Kigali, later on today. But there are still questions remaining here on whether that flight will take off. And if it does, how many people will be on board. There are 3 more legal challenges being heard in court today. These are migrants who are supposed to be on that flight later today. They're being represented by their lawyers in court. They are bringing cases under the Human Rights Act, trying to get their tickets cancelled. For example, if they can prove that they have a family member living here in the United Kingdom, no matter how distant that relation may be, they may be allowed to stay in the United Kingdom. So those are the sorts of arguments that we're going to be hearing in court later on today. But the numbers of migrants who are expected to be on this flight have dwindled dramatically in the past few days. 130 migrants were told that they were eligible to be on this flight for deportation to Rwanda. That became 31 migrants on Friday, and that number has now reportedly dwindled down to just 7 or 8 migrants at this point in time. And of course, we've got those legal challenges today, so that could mean that a further 3 are taken off that passenger list, leaving just 4 migrants on that plane departing to Kigali later on today, at which point it is estimated that this flight has cost £500,000. So if there's just 4 migrants on it, we're looking at £125,000 a head to deport these migrants to Rwanda. Now, Liz Truss has been speaking this morning. She says it's value for money. She says it's about the principle and setting a precedent that if you come to the UK illegally, you can be deported to Rwanda. She said if the migrants are not on this plane, then they will be on the next one. Now, the government want this plane to take off in an undisclosed location from an undisclosed airline. So we don't have any confirmation of where exactly this flight will take off, but there has been conversation this morning that it could be at an RAF base, it could be at a commercial airport, but we will of course bring you up to date on GB News once we have any more information.
Well, thank you, Ellie, for bringing us that update. A very important day for the government to see if this policy will indeed kick off with this first flight. Thank you, Ellie. Well, here to discuss more of this is Alp Mehmet, who's chairman of Migration Watch UK, which is a campaign group advocating for lower immigration into the UK. Good morning, Alp. Always good to see you. Look, obviously, you followed this.
Privilege entirely mine.
Oh, thank you. You followed this stuff for years and years now, haven't you? And this is, some might say, the moment you might have been waiting for. These first flights finally taking these illegal immigrants, to Rwanda as part of a policy, a government policy on the issue. Is this policy convincing you that this is a way to deal with it?
Well, I've always been supportive ever since the policy was first mooted, when the legislation was being bandied about and there was a consultation to which we, like lots of other people, contributed. Yes, I've always also said, though, that Rwanda on its own will not solve the problem. It has to be part of a wider programme, a wider set of measures that will send the clear message that anyone who seeks to come to this country illegally, as this is, they're setting off in unseaworthy boats from unauthorised embarkation points. It is illegal, for goodness sake. Apart from that, it's risking people's lives. So it's got to stop, and we've got to send the message out to the traffickers, but also to those who are risking their lives to do it, that it won't work. if Rwanda contributes to that message, then I think it will be a good thing and well worth pursuing.
Now, obviously, in my view, the other side of this would be, say, processing centres elsewhere so that people don't have to make the crossing. That's one I'm presuming you would agree with that as part of the policy. But what do you make of the Church of England and other people speaking out, calling it immoral and saying that it's an immoral policy that shames Britain?
Well, I think that's a lot of humbug, frankly, to suggest that what most people in this country want to see happen is somehow immoral. I think that in itself is a wicked thing to say from people like the Archbishop of Canterbury and, dare I say, His Royal Highness as well. I think that they should really take note from some people who know what they're talking about, rather than going on headlines as to what is actually going on. Yes. I disagree with them, and I think most people in this country would disagree with them, and I think it's not worthy of them, frankly.
It's interesting that those two people specifically, Prince Charles talking about immorality, let's not mention Camilla and Di, and also the Archbishop and all the scandals that...
Well,
but what
I'm not sure that's this.
But all the scandals that have hit the Church of England as well. I mean, I just think that those people speaking out on it is not helpful.
No, but it's not helpful. I think it's wrong, and most people in this country would think it's wrong. I believe that, first of all, the flight has to go ahead. That will be, if it doesn't go ahead, it will send all the wrong messages out.
Do you not think we've seen these scenes before, sort of people protesting and trying to stop planes from actually taking off? We've seen it before when the government's deporting foreign criminals, for example, and things like that. Isn't there a strong likelihood that actually we're going to see activists on the ground at wherever it is, they'll figure it out somehow, trying to stop this flight taking off?
Well, it's a free country, and we can all protest if we want to. What we mustn't do is prevent the law from being enforced, and that is what is happening. That is wrong, and that should not be allowed to happen. But if people want to protest, of course.
Yeah. What about the Nationality and Borders Bill? I thought there was some provision in it to stop all these repeat appeals that seem to be, prohibiting this process from taking place.
Yeah. Well, it's only just started. We've only just the bill itself, now an act, has just received royal assent. So we haven't got to the stage yet where all that the legislation allows for has been implemented. But it will be, and with a bit of luck, the government really does pursue that line of dealing with the problem.
I just want to raise something which does always seem to be left out of this conversation, which is that France has gotten away with murder almost here because, we'd given them a lot of money to try and sort of stop the crossings from the people from crossing into the UK in the first place. They've gone up, so that hasn't worked. They now basically have no incentive at all to stop these boats coming across because they know the UK now have a policy and they're going to send them elsewhere. I mean, France, are laughing at us pretty much now, aren't they?
I don't know if they're laughing at us. I think that what they're doing is actually is not in their own interest, frankly. What is happening now is not just France allowing people to make their way illegally into their country, but it's happening at the external borders of the EU. The EU really needs to get a grip. In 2021, there were nearly 240,000 illegal migrants detected coming into the EU, which was something like 90,000 more than it was in 2019, let alone in 2020. So the EU, which pays pots of money to Turkey, for goodness sake, I mean, it's not above them to be pushing people back from Greece, from Italy, as well as paying Turkey billions in order to hang on to migrants, really, asylum seekers, for want of a better word.
What about the UNHCR, though? Because they're backing the moves by the unions and these sort of legal and charities to sort of stop this whole Rwanda policy. And yet other countries have done similar things and they've not said anything about it.
Well, interestingly, there was a photo in the Telegraph, I think, a few days ago, of an area with a lot of migrants, I assume, those who had sought refuge from countries like Burundi and Libya. And looking over and watching over them was someone with a UNHCR high-vis jacket on. I know that the government has, not only the lawyers that the government, high-ranking, really very good lawyers, have looked into all this, but they've been working with the UNHCR all along in order to ensure that the human rights of the people concerned are not in any way being contravened.
Yeah, and that will be why I suppose the High Court said this is legal and this can go ahead, and then the Courts of Appeal actually reaffirmed.
We need to be a bit careful there, Mercy, because what has happened now, the courts have said that those who are being sent, and what the activists wanted to do was stop the whole flight because it would potentially be against the interests of those being removed. The courts, as I understand it, have said, and I'm not a lawyer, but they have said, no, you haven't made the case for that. But whether the legislation is in line with and doesn't contravene international law, that's still to be decided. As far as I'm concerned, this having gone through our parliament, through our courts, if we think it's okay, then we should surely have the final say as to who can and who cannot enter our country.
Well, I don't see what's wrong with Rwanda. Rwanda seems like an OK place.
Rwanda's a beautiful country.
Exactly, I don't get it.
And we're actually paying people to go there.
Exactly. It makes no sense, but then I suppose a lot of these people have never been there, so they haven't got a clue.
Well, yeah, I did read one of them saying they've never even heard of Rwanda before then, and they're awfully terrified about going. But, you know, I think that they'll find that if they arrive there, it's probably not as bad as they think. But it is this case that they do have a patchy human rights record.
Well, that was over a quarter of a century again.
No, but I mean, the current president still has a very patchy record in terms of upholding people's
Well, our Prime Minister has a very patchy record. I mean, all politicians have patchy records, frankly.
Germany has a patchy record. You know, Russia has a patchy record. They all have a patchy record, you know.
What about the 30,000 who have gone there from Burundi and the 500 or so who've gone from Libya and others who have sought refuge in Rwanda?
All assisted by the UNHCR as well. All assisted by the UNHCR.
And sometimes praised by the UNHCR. Look, it's complicated, but let us know what you think.
They should be sent to Rwanda.
Well, gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email, but after the break, our London reporter Alice Porter will be here at home talking to those affected by the Grenfell Tower disaster, which was 5 years ago now. That's the anniversary today, actually. That's all after the weather.
Thanks, Al. Lovely to talk.
Good morning. Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Temperatures will be ticking up through the rest of this week, turning hot, especially by Friday. Some strong sunshine as well, but it's not blue skies everywhere. High pressure is dominating, but there are weather fronts at times just toppling into the northwest. So western parts of Scotland always keeping a fair bit of cloud and some outbreaks of rain, some across the northeast of Scotland this morning. That should be fizzling out. So much of eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. 1 or 2 isolated showers for southern Scotland. Most of Northern Ireland also set fair, and certainly for most of England and Wales. It's a cracking day, if you like. Sunny spells and temperatures ticking up. A coolish start out there right now, but temperatures by this afternoon widely over 20 degrees across the southern half of the UK, probably peaking at 24, maybe 25 across the southeast, just 13 or 14 in the northwest with that showery rain over the Highlands and the Western Isles. That'll continue to come and go through this evening. Otherwise, it's a dry evening, a beautiful evening with largely clear skies staying that way overnight as well. Temperatures will drop down with those clear skies and light winds. We'll keep some outbreaks of rain going across northern parts of Scotland. into tomorrow, and it's a very similar day, actually. We'll see, again, plenty of blue sky across England, Wales, much of southern and eastern Scotland, a bit of showery rain across the far northeast, and always some rain at times close to the Western Isles and the west coast. Maybe a bit more cloud pushing into Northern Ireland with a small chance of a shower here, but we should see sunny spells in Belfast, and temperatures ticking up higher by tomorrow. We're looking more widely into the mid-20s across England and Wales, maybe 28 across the southeast. That's 82 in Fahrenheit. Again, cooler in the northwest where these weather fronts persist. The high pressure, though, still dominant for most through the rest of this week. As it ekes eastwards, hotter air arrives with temperatures set to peak across England and Wales on Friday, over 30 Celsius in some places.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good morning. It's 10:24 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akwir on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, today marks 5 years since the Grenfell Tower disaster, which saw 72 people lose their lives after a fire believed to have started from a fridge freezer ripped through the 23-storey tower block in West London.
Yes, well, the fire also revealed an enormous housing safety scandal in the UK, with many people still fighting for justice, as our London reporter Alice Porter reports.
Fire brigade. Yeah, hello, hi. In the fire, flat 16 Grenfell Tower. Sorry, a fire where? Flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
It was one of the UK's worst modern disasters, as mothers, fathers, children and family members all perished in unimaginable circumstances. Survivors were left homeless, having lost almost all their belongings. Grief soon turned to anger. Theresa May immediately ordered a public inquiry as grieving relatives like Hamdan al-Alami demanded answers.
Here, my family here. Why? Day and night I no sleep. Always cry. I have 4 family die.
Soon after the fire, it quickly emerged that the flammable cladding on the block was central to the rapid spread of the fire. And it turned out that this cladding and other fire safety defects were found in tens of thousands of buildings across the country. Many became completely worthless, and leaseholders had to foot the bill to make them safe. Hayley Tillotson is one of them.
I actually went bankrupt at the end of 2020 because me and my neighbours in my flat in Leeds were paying for hundreds of pounds in Waking Watch, in new fire alarms and insuring and building insurance, and just loads of costs that we should never have had to pay because it just isn't our fault.
After mounting pressure, Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced in January that building developers would be the ones to remove dangerous cladding.
I'm clear about who should pay the price for remedying failures. It should be the industries who profited as they caused the problem and those who continue to profit as they make it worse. To those who missold dangerous products like cladding or insulation, to those who cut corners to save cash as they developed or refurbished people's homes, and to those who sought to profiteer from the consequences of the Grenfell tragedy, we are coming for you.
But since then, many argue that little has changed and that progress has been too slow. 2 weeks ago, the government banned the specific type of cladding which allowed the blaze to spread so rapidly, half a decade since the fire took place. But while debate over housing regulations continue and the much-delayed public inquiry into Grenfell rumbles on, a community continues to grieve. During the Jubilee weekend, a poignant street party was held close to the tower, with 72 empty chairs to commemorate those who died. Emma O'Connor is one of the survivors of the fire.
It should really be speaking volumes to the government that we care and your actions speak louder than words, and we don't see any government help. We just we're not even allowed the tower back under our control.
Grenfell Tower still looms over London's landscape like a gravestone, a constant reminder of all those who lost their lives. Alice Porter, GB News.
Well, Alice joins us now to talk a bit more about that. Good morning, Alice. Really tragic, isn't it, that 5 years on, as you mentioned there, people are still trying to get justice, and people who were living in these homes with similar cladding are having to pay for it to get removed. I mean, what's the sense you've got today from people you've been speaking to about how content they have been with the government's response?
Hi there, good morning. Well, I think it's a very varied picture, and I think it's important to point out that no one has ever been prosecuted in relation to the Grenfell fire disaster. And so for a lot of survivors who are very angry today, 5 years on, they very much feel that justice has not been served. I mean, we've had the inquiry that's been ongoing, but fewer of half the recommendations from the inquiry have been adopted into law. So there'll be many people who feel that it's simply not good enough, that it's 5 years on. As I was saying there in my piece, only 2 weeks ago did the government ban the specific cladding that was on Grenfell Tower. But I think today is also a time of remembrance as much as it is of anger. We've got at 11 o'clock a commemorative service which is being held at Westminster Abbey, but also closer to Grenfell Tower there are a number of services that are taking place. I'm actually just outside Avondale Park Primary School, and it was really quite eerie. They've obviously just held a service outside with children singing, and I was just looking at the tower and hearing children's voices through the area was immensely poignant, because of course of the 72 people who lost their lives, 18 of them were children, and they were children obviously who would never grow up. So I think today is a very sad day, particularly for them and their families. But I've also been out speaking with people who did some enormous good work when the fire took place, because there were 200 families and households that were suddenly homeless, nowhere to go, and no possessions. I've just come from the Al-Manor Muslim Cultural and Heritage Centre, and I was speaking with their chief executive about some of the donations they received at the time. This is what he had to say to me.
I think I am so proud to say that this was a nationwide initiative to support the survivors of Grenfell Tower. People sometimes talk about community, but it was really a nationwide support we received. It left a huge mark, a positive mark in my life, because at the time, differences like religious, ethnicity, and any other perceived difference were really non-existent. You could not see them. So you would find people volunteering, coming from all walks of life and coming from different age groups, including, in fact, the first people to arrive here to volunteer were 3 young women. I now would assume they would be around 16 to 18. And these were the first ones to come here. And I thought, when I saw them at 8 o'clock outside our door, I thought they were survivors from the tower. And they said, no, we just came here to help if you need any help. So it was quite amazing.
That was Abdul Rahman Saeed, the chief executive of the community centre that I was just speaking with earlier. So I think that gives a sense there of some of the people who were instrumental in supporting people when the fire took place. But of course, there are many people across not only London, but across the whole of the UK who are concerned about their flats, concerned about issues to do with cladding, and very much believe 5 years on that lessons simply have not been learned.
Update. Thank you so much. Very, very sad day. Awful, awful tragedy, really. And what the cladding situation, though, now, obviously the government then sort of slightly changed the rules. And what I now really concerned about is those who now are in unsafe cladding in their homes, because we never want to see that happen again.
Yeah, and there certainly will be people who are still in that unsafe cladding, and, you know, some people have gone bankrupt, as we heard, from having to basically make themselves safe, because the people who sold them their properties clearly didn't sell them very safe properties.
Well, actually, it was slightly that, but then the government changed the rules. So after the Grenfell disaster, they changed the rules. So that meant that those who did not no longer, they were now no longer met the criteria. So that was the problem.
Yeah.
So then the leaseholders were then forced to try and pay for that through the
well, I think it's right that the rules have changed now, basically,
the developers should pay.
Towards having to make the developers pay. But let us know what you think. Keep your views coming in, GBViews at gbnews.uk. But after the break, we commemorate another anniversary, the end of the Falklands War, which was 40 years ago today. But before that, a look at this morning's news headlines.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Foreign Secretary has defended government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after criticism from religious leaders. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York have called the measures immoral and that they shamed Britain. The first plane is scheduled to leave the UK today with up to 11 people on board after some legal challenges failed yesterday. At least 3 further court cases are expected to be brought forward today. Well, Liz Truss says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against the UK after the government set out its plans to override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. The European Commission has threatened to take legal action against the UK. Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney warned the plans could destabilise the situation in Northern Ireland. Well, the UK government here is claiming the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel from the rest of Great Britain. The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to 29.6 million. But wages have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. Data from the ONS shows that while employment is rising, it does remain below pre-pandemic levels. Thousands more railway workers are to be balloted for industrial action, threatening to cause even more travel disruption for passengers this summer. It's the Transport Salaried Staffs Association. They've served notice to ballot more than 6,000 staff at Network Rail. They're in a dispute over pay, conditions and job security, the same dispute that's behind the RMT and ASLEF national rail strikes planned for later this month and next. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.215 to the dollar. The pound is 1.162 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,501.48 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. What's the time now? Oh, coming up to 38 minutes after 10 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Aguirre, and also it's with Mercy Maroki.
Yes. Now, today marks 40 years since the liberation of the Falkland Islands after the Argentine Invasion of 1982. The battle to win back the British South Atlantic territory lasted 74 days and cost the lives of 255 British servicemen. Nearly 800 were injured.
Now, hundreds of Argentinian troops were also killed. Events are being held today on the islands and here in the UK to commemorate the end of the war. GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White looks at the legacy of the conflict and the effect it had on those who lived on the islands at the time.
It was a huge gamble, dispatching a military task force 8,000 miles into the South Atlantic winter. But for Margaret Thatcher's government, recapturing the Falklands was a political imperative. After 74 days under Argentinian control, the islands were finally liberated on the 14th of June 1982. But not before a heavy toll on both sides, with more than 250 British servicemen killed, almost 650 Argentinian losses, the deaths of 3 islanders, and a local population left deeply traumatised.
This was the kind of kit that really alarmed us because it was very heavy armour, and you can see that there's a turret there with at least a .5-inch machine gun, if not a cannon, and these were grinding through our streets.
Graham Bound was a young photojournalist in April 1982, running the local newspaper in Port Stanley, when he was suddenly faced with the scoop of a lifetime, an invading Argentinian army. Many of the images he captured during those months of conflict are being seen publicly for the first time, part of a fascinating exhibition at the Chatham Naval Dockyard. Images that of course document the military operation, but also the plight of a captive population caught in the middle of a violent struggle to retake the islands.
These Argentines are being rounded up by British troops. You can see, I think, Paras or Marines doing their best to round them up and at the same time getting these men to clear up a little bit. But the mess was unspeakable. This was one of our general stores here, which had been torched and was gone, but the smoke was still lingering. And when I look at these, I can almost still smell them. It was just a complete scene out of hell, frankly.
It was the day of the Vulcan bombing of Stanley Airfield that we heard HMS Hermes trying to get through to the Argentine High Command to offer terms of surrender.
Saul Pitaluga was a teenager at the time of the invasion when he and his father were captured by the Argentinians as they tried to relay a radio message from the British task force to the Argentinian command.
Long story short, they arrested my dad and took him into Stanley for some fairly rigorous questioning, and including having a gun held to his head and the mechanism being clicked to try and sort of extract more information.
By the time the Argentinians surrendered, along with the hundreds killed, the British had lost half a dozen ships and more than 30 aircraft.
4 decades on from the Falklands War, the lessons learned from that conflict have been used to help shape and improve the UK's military. Destroyers and frigates are now much better protected from air and missile strikes, and it's the reason why we now have 2 super carriers, 3 times bigger than the Falklands-era aircraft carriers, better able to protect the fleet.
As the sacrifices in this pivotal military campaign are remembered, Graham Bound is anxious that the islanders, who also suffered, are not forgotten.
It's a thing quite near to my heart because I actually think that everybody just had to pick themselves up and carry on. I look at these guys, both of whom are now gone, and I'm quite proud of them, and I think they did a really good job. I wish they weren't perhaps a little bit forgotten.
Well, Mark White joins us now. Good morning, Mark. I mean, I found those words interesting towards the end there about this being slightly forgotten. And, you know, for people of my generation, we won't have a living memory of this kind of thing. Just explain to us, really, what the significance of this 40-year anniversary is.
Well, it was very significant, really. The first major conflict that this country was involved in after the Second World War, and 30,000 servicemen, women, civilians as well, were involved in the effort to try to regain the Falkland Islands from Argentinian rule, who had taken over the islands and were in control of the islands for some 74 days. Now, we are at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. There will be a number of services taking place throughout the day and a main event at 2 o'clock here today. Now, the Royal British Legion, who are coordinating this event, have invited 2,800 guests, including veterans, their families, other people with connections to the Falklands and to the services as well. And we are at the moment by the memorial to HMS Argonaut, a Leander-class frigate. And with me is the widow of one of 2 crewmen who died when that vessel was attacked on the 21st of May 1982. Margaret Allen, thanks for talking to us on GB News. Tell us about your husband, Ian Baldy, the kind of man he was and what happened.
Ian was a very special individual, although obviously I'm slightly biased. But when he left to go to the Falklands, we'd only shared less than 2 weeks of married life. So we were so very happy. He was bright, he was loving, he was caring, he was very supportive and very protective of me. And he was killed on the 21st of May, 1982, when 2,000-pound bombs hit the ship. He died alongside our friend Matthew Stewart, who was killed on his 18th birthday.
We're just looking at the photographs now with Matthew on the left and Ian on the right, 2 handsome lads, particularly Ian with some Scottish roots, of course.
Yes.
It's in the genes there. But, you know, for you and so many of the families, it's 40 years on, but the trauma of that time must live with you always.
Yes, it does. It's difficult. You would think that 40 years afterwards you'd have come to some sort of agreement, if you like, with the past and the circumstances. But unfortunately the circumstances were so difficult that for most of us, I think, it's taken a very long time to kind of get back into some kind of balance.
And if we just come around to this side of the memorial, Margaret, you wrote a poem, of course, for your late husband. Some of that poem, a paragraph at least, is inscribed on the memorial here. Could you just read that for us, please?
These islands are so special that I needed him to be so warm yet strong in spirit to do this task for me. I will never take him from you. He will always be around. For where hearts are joined together, there my kingdom will be found.
That's beautiful, very poignant words, Margaret. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us on GB News. We really appreciate that, and we will be here throughout the day with coverage of that special service at 2 o'clock today, speaking to veterans and their families about their experiences 40 years ago.
Yes, well, Mark, thank you for bringing us that, and we do look forward to seeing you a bit later and at 2 o'clock as well for that memorial service. Now, one of the enduring images of the Falklands conflict was that of Simon Weston. He's the soldier in the Welsh Guards who was on board RFA Sir Galahad when their vessel was bombed and set on fire by Argentine fighter jets. He received burns to 46% of his body and his face was severely disfigured.
But despite his injuries, Simon has spent the past 40 years raising funds of the Falkland Veterans Foundation to commemorate the 40th anniversary. He's helping to release a single and asking for musicians to come forward to help. Our reporter Jeff Moody went to meet him.
For 40 years, he's been the face of the Falklands conflict, a face that reminds us of the darkness of war, but also the light at the end of it. But it comes at a price.
For me, I was waking up in the middle of the night, rolling round on the bedroom floor. I was on fire again, and what would wake me up was, in my nightmare, was a black jet screaming overhead with a hooded figure with flaming demonic eyes.
The nightmares have passed. Time is a healer. Today, the soldier and survivor has teamed up with soprano Carly Williams to release a single to raise funds for the Falklands Veterans Foundation.
It's hugely important, you know, and it's a beautiful song. And, you know, Carly sings it beautifully. But I totally agree that it's such a big song that it needs to have that big sound behind it.
So the hunt is on for that big sound. They're appealing to orchestras to come forward and volunteer to help re-release this single.
If we had an orchestra, it would just lift it slightly. It's very beautiful at the moment with the piano, but the real aim is for the orchestra to hopefully come in and lift it and do performances like memorials and events that take place in memory. It is currently on Spotify, the song, and on Amazon Music, and all of the proceeds go towards the charity. But we're quite keen to get it released with an orchestral sound. So if anyone would like to take part, then we'd be delighted to hear from them.
For Simon, funding has never been more important.
You know, and there are different triggers as to what happens in mental health, what kicks it off, and what makes you spiral in one way or lift in another. And there are different triggers for everybody. So, you know, whether it's euphoria or dismay, but we have to try and work harder. But there just aren't enough psychiatrists and psychologists who specialise in this area in the country, you know. So we can knock people or knock the system as much as we would like, but it's not going to change the fact there aren't enough people to do the job.
As the 40th anniversary brings the conflict into sharper focus, calls are growing now for Simon to receive a knighthood. It's news to him.
If it does happen, it does happen. But I'm not going to live my life in hope for something to happen. There's unbelievably large amounts of people in this country who deserve to be recognised for many, many things. And there are people that go unrecognised all their lives and they make such a massive difference in so many people's lives. So I think I'll leave that to the powers that be. It's nothing to do with me. I'm not involved in it. I don't know anything about anybody particularly starting anything or wanting to do anything. But if it does come around, it comes around. But you know, I don't live in hope of that one.
Simon might not, but there are plenty who do. Jeff Moody, GB News.
I remember that so well, the whole the Falklands War. I know you said that you weren't around. I'm sorry, I'm double your age, so...
Yeah, so because, you know, obviously it's something that you learn about growing up. You don't learn about it enough, I suppose, because the schools tend to focus on the world wars. But it's very difficult imagining Britain sort of being involved in a war in that way, because in my lifetime, I mean, of course, there's been the Iraq War, but in my lifetime you don't see those things often, and you don't see those things on the TV and British soldiers being involved in that kind of thing, luckily, anymore.
My dad, he recorded everything on VHS. He watched the whole thing. I can remember, and it was, you know, he was... I remember when he was watching it at times, he was in tears watching it. But he kept up to date with what was going on there. But it really... It was an interesting time in history.
Yeah. Well, let us know what your memories of that time were. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But now, moving on, soon teachers from any country in the world will be able to work in England more easily. That's according to ministers. They've announced a change that will mean qualified teachers with equivalent credentials and at least 1 year of classroom experience will be able to work in English schools without retraining in the UK.
Now, head teachers across the country have said that the change is a sign of the severity of the teacher shortage in our schools. But is our next guest one of those teachers? Tom Davis is the principal of David Game College in Liverpool. Tom, thank you for joining us. So, sounds like there must be a severe shortage. Do you think this is a sign of the severe shortage? And if so, is it the right thing to be doing?
Well, thank you for having me on. I think it is a sign of the shortage. I think it's not necessarily something that we don't welcome, but slightly cautiously. I think it's good that they're talking about equivalency for the qualifications of those who would come to the UK and teach. And it remains an option for those teachers to still do the early careers induction period. But it's how they would test that equivalency, I think, that we're slightly cautious about. It's never a bad thing to have an international perspective in a classroom, for kids' minds to be broadened. But I think we'd be interested to see how the government are proposing that they would assess equivalency in particular subjects.
They won't have to then retrain in a British classroom, because that's what it sounds like reading that. Because I'd be pretty nervous. I lecture in schools. I go to different schools across the country. I have done for the last 8 years. And I personally would be slightly nervous. You mentioned the equivalency as well, but the fact they're not going to have any retraining in British classrooms, is that a worry?
I think it depends on the teacher and what their background is. At David Game, for example, we insist that our teachers have a first degree in the subject that they will be teaching, so they come in with a level of expertise. When you're looking at something and assessing equivalency, that's going to be the real test. If they've been trained to the same standard that they would be trained if they came to the UK, and they have a year's worth of experience in the classroom, that could be a very good thing. But I think we mustn't lose sight of the main two problems that the teaching profession in the UK still faces, even with this scheme. And that is that we have far fewer applying to become teachers. Government figures, I think, last in 2021 suggested a 23% drop in new applications. And the challenges with retaining people. People are leaving the profession. It is so difficult to recruit teachers at the moment. So while we would cautiously welcome a broadening of the pool to people with appropriate training and appropriate experience that can be proven, it doesn't solve the problems that the UK is experiencing domestically.
And I just want to focus on the reasons why that might be, because, you know, I've seen schools. I have a daughter. She's been to a couple of different schools. And quite frankly, some kids are little pieces of work these days. There seems to be a lack of discipline in our schools in a way that perhaps there didn't used to be. Teachers are overworked and underpaid. You know, class sizes seem to be getting bigger and bigger. So aren't those the things that government really need to address instead of bringing more teachers into the same conditions?
I would certainly agree with that. Teaching is an honourable profession. It's a fantastic profession. The impact that you can have, I think everybody has a teacher that they think back on and think that's the reason that I became whatever I became. I certainly have one of those. But I think you're right. The terms and the conditions are really getting quite challenging at the moment, especially in the state sector. If you look at median pay, it's around 21% now, I think lower than it was in 2010 and 2011. And the working hours that teachers need to put in to truly support their students continue to go up. Whilst it dipped a little bit during the pandemic, you're looking at around an average of a 47-hour working week, which is almost an entire working day above a 9 to 5. A third of teachers put in that extra time for no additional reward whatsoever. And yes, you're right, group sizes are challenging, resourcing is challenging. So I do think that the government needs to think very carefully about how they're going to make this a profession that people want to join and that competes with other career choices, and a profession that people want to stay in. The last figures that I saw suggested that you've got sort of, I think it's 15% of teachers leaving within their first year. After 3 years, 25%
we're running out of time
gone.
because we're heading towards the top of the hour.
Yes, thank you
Sure.
But we hear you, and let's hope that the government think of something that will work out.
Yes, thank you, Tom Davis, there,
Absolutely.
the principal of David Game College in Liverpool.
Right, so let's take you through some of the headlines of the day that you may have missed. A study has found that the age most people feel they're sexiest is 53. I've still got about 3 years, well, if I don't count this year, 2 years then to go.
Yeah, well, researchers from dating site Our Time found that 4 in 10 53-year-olds said they were more comfortable and confident in themselves than at any other point in their life, which is more than any of the other over 50 age groups polled.
In fact, a third of over 50 said hitting the big 5-0 meant they let go of their past insecurities and inhibitions. It's true, I'm bald under this. No, I'm joking. They say that dating... well, I might do it, though. They say the dating science is better, too. 18% of them said that it's spicier and more exciting than dating when they're dating in their 20s. So that's good, isn't it?
Yes, well, I suppose 50-year-old men would be more experienced, wouldn't they?
You don't go for them, you go for the young ones. What do you think this is? No, but when I'm 51, though, this year, July 19th.
That's my birthday.
No! How come you never said? I thought I was the only one here with
I can't believe that.
Freedom Day.
I don't meet many people who are July 19th.
You kept quiet about it as well. I thought it was just me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. We share a same birthday. Let's have a joint birthday party.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, a little reminder that every Wednesday we hand over the show to you. It's your show, full of your ideas and what you want us to talk about. So how it works, you email in at tothepoint@gbnews.uk. Tell us what you want to see us talking about tomorrow, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about. But we will be back for another hour. We're here till midday. But for now, here's the news and a break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio. On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Nana Akwe and Mercy Moroki. We are online on TV and on your digital radio until midday with the show jam-packed, loads of stuff, big stories, discussions, experts, guests and your opinions, of course.
Yes, and we want to hear your opinions, and you can send them in to gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to as many as we can throughout the next hour, but first, let's give you the latest news headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister has defended government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after criticism from religious leaders. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York have called the measures immoral, and they say they shamed Britain. Well, after legal challenges yesterday, up to 11 people are now expected to be on the first flight today. At least 3 further appeals from migrants scheduled on board will be brought forward today. The Foreign Secretary says those who aren't on this flight will be on another one. Boris Johnson says the policy will protect migrants.
We are not going to be in any way deterred or abashed by some of the criticism that is being directed upon this policy, some of it from slightly unexpected quarters. The objective is to ensure that we make that clear distinction that I think everybody can see is fair and reasonable between legal immigration to this country by safe and legal routes and distinguishing that from dangerous and illegal cross-channel migration.
Well, the Labour Party opposed the policy in Parliament. The Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the scheme is unworkable, it's too expensive and it's not very British.
There's a huge backlog at the moment, which is partly why people are coming to this country, are here for years waiting for applications to be processed. So those that don't have a right to stay in this country aren't being sent back. We wouldn't be cutting the National Crime Agency budget by 20%, the very agency that is there to tackle these smuggling gangs. And we would make it illegal for these gangs to advertise their wares, essentially, on social media.
The Foreign Secretary says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against the government's plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, the EU's threatened legal action if the changes go ahead. Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister, Simon Coveney, warned it could destabilise peace in Northern Ireland. Well, the UK government claims the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel there from Great Britain. Liz Truss told GB News the important thing is to restore the Good Friday Agreement.
We do need to resolve these issues, but we're doing it in a way that doesn't harm the European Union. We're still making sure the single market is protected. We're still making sure north-south trade is protected. So there really is no reason for a negative reaction from the EU from what we're doing.
The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to 29.6 million. But wages have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. Data from the ONS shows that while employment is rising, it remains below pre-pandemic levels. More than 1,000 patients a day were spending 12 hours or longer in A&E in England last year. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine, who used Freedom of Information requests to gather the information, described the numbers as alarming. They say the NHS doesn't have enough staff to provide necessary services and that patient safety has never been at greater risk. Now, Scotland's First Minister is relaunching a campaign for Scotland's independence. She's speaking now, Nicola Sturgeon. Let's have a listen.
And as the outward-looking nation, we have always been play our part in building a stronger, safer, better world. Today, Scotland, like countries across the world, faces significant challenges. But we also have huge advantages and immense potential. The refreshed case for independence is about how we equip ourselves to navigate the challenges and fulfil that potential, now and in future. In their day-to-day lives, people across Scotland are, of course, suffering the impacts of the soaring cost of living, low growth and increasing inequality, constrained public finances and the many, many implications of a Brexit that we did not vote for. These problems have all been made worse, or most obviously in the case of Brexit, directly caused by the fact we are not independent. So at this critical juncture, we face a fundamental question. Do we stay tied to a UK economic model that consigns us to relatively poor economic and social outcomes, which are likely to get worse, not better, outside the European Union? Or do we instead lift our eyes with hope and optimism and take inspiration from comparable countries across Europe? Comparable neighbouring countries with different characteristics, countries that in many cases lack the abundance of resources that Scotland is blessed with, but all of them independent and, as we show today, wealthier and fairer than the UK. Today's paper and those that will follow in the weeks and months to come is about substance. That is what really matters. The strength of the substantive case will determine the decision people reach when the choice is offered, as it will be. And it is time now to set out and debate that case. After everything that has happened, Brexit, COVID, Boris Johnson, it is time to set out a different and better vision. It is time to talk about making Scotland wealthier and fairer. It is time to talk about independence and then to make the choice. Now, how we secure that choice, as we are committed to doing, is of course a highly pertinent question. So while today is very much about substance, let me address briefly the issue of process. I was re-elected as First Minister just over 1 year ago on a clear commitment to give the people of Scotland the choice of becoming an independent country. And the people of Scotland elected a Scottish Parliament with a decisive majority in favour of both independence and the right to choose. The Scottish Parliament, therefore, has an indisputable democratic mandate, and we intend to honour that. A referendum, though, if it is to be deliverable, command confidence and achieve its objective, must be lawful. It is the parties opposed to independence and only them who would benefit from doubt about the process. These parties don't want to engage on the substance of this debate because they know how increasingly threadbare their arguments are. Their only hope is to cast doubt on the process. Those of us who relish the opportunity to make and win the substantive case for independence mustn't allow them to do so. Of course, if this UK government had any respect at all for democracy, the issue of legality would be put beyond doubt, as in 2014 through a Section 30 order. I make clear to the Prime Minister again today that I stand ready to discuss the terms of such an order at any time. But my duty as the democratically elected First Minister is to the people of Scotland. It is not to Boris Johnson or to any Tory Prime Minister. This is a UK government that has no respect for democracy. And as we saw again yesterday, it has no regard for the rule of law either. That means if we are to uphold democracy here in Scotland, we must forge a way forward, if necessary, without a Section 30 order. For the reasons I've set out already, however, we must do so in a lawful manner. We know that in these circumstances, the competence of the Scottish Parliament to legislate is contested, and that, therefore, is the situation we must navigate to give people the choice of independence. Now, that work is well underway, and while I do not intend to go further into the detail today, I can say that I do plan to give a significant update to Parliament very soon indeed. The principles of democracy and the rule of law are fundamental. They should unite all of us, regardless of our politics. Indeed, democracy within the rule of law is how differences of political or constitutional opinion should always be resolved. The fact that these principles are now so deeply disrespected and disregarded day and daily in the UK is itself an indication of how broken Westminster governance is. Indeed, that has become part of the argument for independence, and it is to that substantive case that I now return. The choice people arrive at on independence must be an informed one. The case we make must speak not just to those who already support independence, but also, indeed even more so, to those not yet persuaded. It is an obvious point, but one that I think always bears repetition. Scotland will only become independent when a majority of those who live here vote for it. It is in that spirit, therefore, that we publish this first in the Building a New Scotland series of papers. Today we set the scene. I can confirm, though, that papers to come later in the series, and which are already in preparation, will include the issues of currency, Scotland's fiscal position, and how with independence we can build a more sustainable economy and therefore stronger public finances, pensions and social security, EU membership and trade, defence and security. In these papers we will set out how Scotland can benefit from the opportunities, the massive opportunities that independence will present. We will also confront openly the challenges. We will not shy away from tough questions. We will address key issues relating to the transition from a yes vote to independence and the infrastructure that will be required for the governance of an independent country. Of course, on that latter point, Scotland has already come a long way since 2014. A great deal of nation building has been done in the years since. For example, Scotland now has our own tax and social security agencies, an independent fiscal commission and a national investment bank. In other words, substantial parts of the infrastructure that an independent Scotland will need and which did not exist in 2014 are now in place. That means Scotland today is even more prepared for independence than we were in 2014. Of course, any case for change starts with an analysis of the status quo, and that is the purpose of the paper we are publishing today. It really isn't difficult to list the many ways in which Westminster governance is currently failing Scotland and holding us back. We have a Prime Minister with no democratic authority in Scotland and no moral authority anywhere in the UK. Brexit has ripped us out of the EU and the single market against our will, with massive damage to trade, living standards and public services. Thanks to Brexit, the cost of living crisis is worse here in the UK than in any other G7 country. Inflation in the UK is double that of France. UK growth is now projected by the OECD to be the second lowest in the G20 next year. Only sanctioned Russia will be worse. The end of freedom of movement has left our businesses and public services struggling for workers. It has also robbed young people of opportunity. And to compound all of that, we face the very real risk now of an EU trade war due to the UK government's threat to breach international law over the Northern Ireland Protocol. That this is the very same UK government that negotiated and signed the protocol that is actually delivering significant economic benefits to Northern Ireland, only adds to the absurdity. In short, the case for Scotland charting our own course, a better course, is strong and compelling. But the evidence we set out today shows that this case does not just rest on recent or temporary developments. In today's paper, we look in detail at 10 comparator countries: Ireland, Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Iceland, Sweden, Austria, Belgium and Finland. The evidence is overwhelming that these countries, now and over time, perform better than the UK. Compared to these countries, many of them smaller or similarly sized to us, Scotland, under Westminster control, is being held back. With independence, we too would have the levers and the autonomy that these countries take for granted to help fulfil their potential. And let's look at the evidence presented today. Every single one of these comparator countries is wealthier than the UK, and that wealth gap has been maintained over the long term. All of these countries have greater income equality than the UK. Poverty rates are lower in every single one of them, with fewer children living in poverty. Most of them have a smaller gender pay gap. All of them have higher social mobility, and they have more productive and innovative economies too. All of them have higher productivity. Most of them spend more on research and development. Business investment is higher too. The evidence set out in this paper is clear and it is unambiguous. All of these countries, all of them, are wealthier, fairer and more productive than the UK. And all of these countries, all of them, are independent. So as we look to the future, The great question before us is this. If all of these countries can and do use the powers of independence to create wealthier and fairer societies, why not Scotland? With our vast energy resources, why not Scotland? With our globally recognised record of innovation, invention and learning, why not Scotland? With our exceptional food and drink industry, extraordinary natural heritage and the strengths we have in advanced engineering and a range of cutting-edge industries of the future, why not Scotland? Above all, with the talent and the potential of all of the people who live here, why not Scotland? Now, independence does not guarantee success for any country, and we should never pretend that it does. But for Scotland, independence will put the levers that determine success into our own hands. It will mean we can work in partnership with our friends in the rest of the UK, but not be subject to decisions of Westminster governments we don't vote for and which are taking us in the wrong direction. It will give us the ability, just like these comparator countries, to fulfil the vast potential we have and build the wealthier, fairer, happier country we know is possible. That, then, is the prize, building a better nation now and for the future. That, indeed, is the whole purpose of independence. Grasping that prize will not be without challenge. Nothing worth doing ever is. So in the months ahead, we will set out in detail how we can make the transition to independence, how we can navigate and overcome these challenges so that this precious prize, the opportunity of a better country, can be won. Scotland, now and for the generations that come after us, deserves the very best, and independence is how we can secure that. Thank you very much for listening. I will now hand over to Patrick to say a few words before both of us take your questions.
Thank you, First Minister. And last year, of course, we were elected on manifesto commitments to deliver an independence referendum within this parliamentary term. We promised to lay the groundwork for an independent nation that's progressive, compassionate, and built on the principles of democracy, equality and respect for the planet. So it's a real privilege to be here with you today alongside the First Minister and as part of the Scottish Government to set out how we intend to deliver on that commitment. Our world is changing. Economic inequalities are widening. People across Scotland are under ever more intense pressure as inflation grows, and we're accelerating toward climate and environmental breakdown. Now, with the limited levers and the finite budget that the Scottish Government currently has available, we're already doing what we can to navigate these stormy waters and deliver our vision of a fairer and greener Scotland. Just to give a few examples, the Scottish Child Payment is putting money into the pockets of those who need it most, with free bus travel for young people and record investment in energy efficiency targeted at lower income households. We're cutting the cost of living and helping to tackle the climate crisis. These actions and much more show our determination to deliver on our promises. But we also have to be honest about the precarious situation that Scotland is in for as long as Westminster is making decisions over us. Countries the world over are facing economic turmoil and the challenges in transitioning to net zero, but we're forced to do so with our hands tied by the limits of the devolution settlement and held back by a hostile UK government. With the powers of a normal, independent European country, we could chart a different future. So the paper that we published today illustrates this basic but powerful point. It shows that we are being held back environmentally, socially and economically by successive Westminster governments that Scotland didn't vote for, and we all suffer the consequences, either directly or indirectly, as the Scottish Government is forced to spend limited devolved resources to tackle the income inequality that's being created by UK policies, while other European countries succeed by building more equal societies in the first place. The simple fact is that hanging on to the Etonian coattails of the UK government in the hope that one day they might start making the right decisions for the people of Scotland has not worked, nor will it ever work.
We've just been hearing live from Edinburgh, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon relaunching a campaign for Scottish independence, setting out her stall really for the Scottish people. We will remember the Scottish population had a vote back in 2014. Asked, should Scotland be an independent country? 55% of the people who voted said no. Nicola Sturgeon said Scotland is now stronger. She talked a lot about Brexit, mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol, and said she would get into later about the legalities about how this all could come to the forefront. We will keep you up to date. Of course, this is the developing story here on GB News. She said, time is now to set up the debate for the case for Scottish independence. Well, I'll bring you more news as it happens. Right now, let's head back to The Point now with Nana and Mercy.
Well, joining us now for some immediate reaction to Nicola Sturgeon's announcement is John McTernan, former advisor to Tony Blair and former Chief of Staff to Scottish Labour Party Jim Murphy. Thank you for joining us. Now, you heard what Nicola Sturgeon said. She said that people were suffering the impacts of the poor cost of living and Brexit, which they did not vote for. So a lot of her central message was because of the fact that Brexit, which we didn't vote for. And then she highlighted the whole situation that we are potentially being dragged into a trade war because of Westminster government. What was your view on what she was saying?
It was a rehash of the fantasy politics of the SNP. Basically, she was saying, if we were Denmark, we'd be a different country, which is true, but we're not Denmark, we're Scotland. And Scotland's part of the United Kingdom, and it's been part of the United Kingdom, a foundational part of the United Kingdom since 1707. And it's the evasion of the central reality of the UK was what was at the heart of that speech from Nicola Sturgeon and from Patrick Harvey from the Greens. Patrick Harvey gave the game away. He said, we can't do what we want to do because of, quote, finite budgets. No government in the world has infinite budgets, and the Scottish government gets £15 billion a year more to spend on public services than Scotland can raise in taxation. So what Nicola Sturgeon was saying in her evasive way was, we can make a better Scotland, but the first thing we can do is cut 10% of GDP permanently from public spending. And that's what the core of the debate is going to be about. It's going to be, are we better off? And nobody's ever said that cutting their income permanently by 10% is the best way to fight the cost of living, is the best way to increase trade, is the best way to have productivity. So I think it's the same old from Nicola Sturgeon, who cannot even run an education service. She made her priority to close the gap between working class and middle class kids in schools. She quietly abandoned that earlier this year as being too hard to do. If you can't run schools, why on earth should you be able to run an independent country?
Well, you know, Nicola Sturgeon says this new plan, this new series of reports she's going to publish, it's called Building a New Scotland. It's a series of papers. It's going to tackle different issues, she said, such as currency, fiscal, pensions and social security. I do wonder what you make of her avoidance of the fact that actually it might be Scotland that's caused many of Scotland's problems. It might be the SNP that's caused many of Scotland's problems because they still have the highest drug deaths in Europe, for example. Last year was a record high. Nadine Zahawi, the Education Secretary, has said their standards in schools are in free fall because of how low they've gone in the international tables. That's despite them already spending higher than the rest of the UK. So why is Nicola Sturgeon blaming everyone but Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, that is, I mean, you put it really, really well. That is the SNP way. Everything that's wrong is to do with London. Everything that's wrong is to do with the United Kingdom. For some reason, they will not take responsibility for drug deaths in Glasgow, which are not just the highest in Europe, they're significantly higher than other comparable parts of the UK, like Liverpool. They will not take responsibility. They blame the United Kingdom government. It's a government of grievance on the one hand, and a government of magic, sunlit, fairy landscapes in the future when everything will be better. Why? Because of the magic ooffle dust of independence would be sprinkled everywhere. It's kind of like, if my uncle had wheels and 2 handles, he'd be a wheelbarrow. If Scotland weren't Scotland, we'd be different and we'd be better. And there is no proof, and it will be really interesting to see if these are honest papers on currency, for example. So what are the choices? Previously, the Scottish government, the SNP, claimed what they do is keep the pound sterling. So it'd be like Venezuela having the dollar, or Vanuatu and Tuvalu having the Australian dollar. No modern economy in the global north has somebody else's currency. Okay, so you might have a Scottish currency. So if you have a Scottish currency, it will float at 20 to 25% below the UK pound. So the Scottish pound will immediately mean a cut of 20 to 25% in the purchasing power of pensions being paid in Scotland, and a 20 to 25% increase in the cost of mortgages in Scotland. And it will mean that 200,000 jobs will leave Scotland for England, because your own currency, with no track record, with no central bank, because if you set it up immediately you have no central bank, with no central bank to back it, the financial service industry will move from Scotland to England. And it's the integration of Scotland within the United Kingdom that gives it its strength. It gives it a market for renewable energy. It gives it a market for goods and services. Scotland becoming independent will make Scotland poorer. Yes, independent, and she almost got to touch on that. You'll have an SNP government who can't cut crime, who can't manage schools, who can't cut waiting lists, who can't build ferries. Which will come first? The 2 ferries that the nationalised company have been asked to build are not delivered in years, or the independence referendum. And that's the real question. Deliver services first, and then maybe you'll have some credibility in saying you have independence. But they don't want to talk about their record, as you pointed out.
I mean, Mercy absolutely makes a good point for this. But the other interesting thing was that Nicola Sturgeon said that she claimed that the Westminster government have no regard for democracy, but then said even without the Section 30 order, she's going to move forward. So she's just moving forward, irrespective of the democracy, of the fact that the referendum was lost in terms of detaching Scotland from the United Kingdom. So is her vision realistic at all? Because she said that she's setting out the infrastructure. Is it realistic? Is it possible that they could break away and they could be successful in the way that she's talking?
No one has ever doubted that Scotland could be independent. The question is why? Why choose to become poorer? There's not a single step for improving health, education, social mobility, productivity, growth, universities, anything in the public sphere. There's not a single step policy that's made better by removing £15 billion. And that's the thing that they can't explain. It's like a mystic belief. It's a cult that if only you discover the belief in independence, you can be better. But they're going to have to set this out in their papers. And I think it's a trap for Nicola Sturgeon she's fallen into now. She believes that she needs to set out all the case. And if these are honest papers, if they're done honestly by the non-partisan civil servants producing it, then the case against independence will be made by the Scottish government themselves, if it wasn't made already by their incompetence. I mean, yes, of course they could be independent, but they'd not just be a poorer country. We would, in Scotland, not just be poorer, we'd be run by this bunch of incompetent politicians who failed to run competently devolved administration.
Well, she said that the world is changing and that the Westminster government give her a finite budget, and she also talked about all the resources that Scotland has. Is that realistic? Does Scotland have enough resources? Because I thought that we in England and Wales actually send more money over to Scotland, which is why they have things like, free university fees and things like that.
Well, look, the ludicrous thing is to talk about a finite budget, because that implies it'd be possible to have a government with an infinite budget, which is clearly nonsense. But it's the kind of nonsense economics that you require to make independence stack up. And the truth is, every year the Scottish government produce figures. It's the Scottish government, their own economists, produce figures that show you how much money is spent in Scotland on public services, all of them, including pensions, including defence, and how much money is raised by taxation in Scotland, all the taxation, including VAT and the taxes that are raised centrally. And it shows year in, year out that at least £15 billion a year more is spent on public services in Scotland than is raised by taxation. So the first steps, first actions of a Scottish government under independence will be to cut spending, raise taxes and increase borrowing, which is not a recipe for growth. It's a recipe for austerity. It's greater austerity than David Cameron and George Osborne imposed. And it would mean Scotland, independent, with its own currency, without a central bank, with no track record for borrowing, would be paying more to borrow on the open markets for government borrowing. And, you know, if it hadn't been for the UK government and furlough, the Scottish government could not have afforded to keep people in work. If it hadn't been for the UK government bailing out Scottish banks in the global financial crisis, Scotland would have gone into a deep depression it would still be in. So the thing is, being in the United Kingdom is not just getting redistribution, getting support for public services. It's the greatest form of insurance Scotland can have to the kinds of shocks that we do get in the modern world. We've had two of them in just over 10 years, the global financial crisis and the pandemic. You'd have to be a giant optimist to believe there are going to be no more shocks to come.
Yeah. Well, look, Jim Murphy, thank you so much for giving us immediate reaction to that. We know it's just happened, and we all need to digest sort of what she said in this building a new Scotland series of paper. Sorry, I just called you Jim Murphy, and I apologise. You're John McTernan. Sorry.
He's a great man. He's a great man. I'm happy to have his name.
You work for Jim Murphy.
Fair enough. He doesn't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work for him.
Thank you for joining us off the back of that. Now, lots of you, unsurprisingly, have been getting in touch with your views. Some of you have some quite strong views on this.
They do, don't they? Well, I was going to... Can I do the other one, or was that's not fair?
Probably a bit harsh,
I'll leave that one. Oh, well, how about Stuart then? Stuart says that it's plain to see after that speech the SNP are a bunch of nasty extremists, that's his thoughts, who for some reason, despite the rest of the UK and the good people of Scotland, deserve much better. So that's his views on that.
Yeah, although I have lost the person's name now, but somebody said, well, that would mean no more Tory government. Let's go for independence. So somebody does actually agree with Nicola Sturgeon. Clive, however, says before being re-elected, Nicola Sturgeon was asked who should people vote for if they don't want independence, and she said that people who didn't want independence should still vote for her. So they're saying that in a way people have been duped into almost voting for her under the belief that she wouldn't be pursuing this independence referendum.
Well, they haven't got much choice either. The Labour Party have failed in Scotland. Very fine. I'm going to read this from Judith. She said it would be very sad not to have the United Kingdom, but many don't think that this is. Let Scotland go and be independent, clear-cut independence, no payoffs, no lingering requests for funds. Let them go and prove that they can be independent.
Yes, well, and it was Angus said, onwards to independence. But now coming up, today marks 40 years since the liberation of the Falkland Islands after the Argentine Invasion of 1982. We'll be speaking to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who looks at how the invasion has affected the islanders. But first, the news headlines with Rosie Wright.
It's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Now, as we've been hearing, Scotland's First Minister says there's an indisputable mandate for a second referendum on Scotland's independence from the United Kingdom. Speaking just now in Edinburgh, Nicola Sturgeon said it would allow for a wealthier, fairer and more resilient nation. She says people in Scotland are suffering from many implications of a Brexit they did not vote for. Scotland previously held a referendum in 2014 on the issue. 55% of the country at the time voted against independence. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has defended government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after criticism from religious leaders. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York have called the measures immoral and say they shamed Britain. After legal challenges yesterday, up to 11 people are expected to be on the first flight today. At least 3 further appeals from migrants scheduled on board, though, will be brought forward. The Foreign Secretary says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against government plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, the EU has threatened legal action if the changes do go ahead. And Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney warned the new plans could destabilise peace in Northern Ireland. The government claims the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel there from Great Britain. The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to 29.6 million. But wages have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. Data from the ONS shows that while employment is rising, it remains below pre-pandemic levels. Thousands more railway workers are due to be balloted for industrial action, threatening to cause even more travel disruption for passengers this summer. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association now have served notice to ballot more than 6,000 staff at Network Rail. It's in disputes over pay, conditions and job security. The same dispute that's behind the RMT and ASLEF national rail strikes planned for later this month and July. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.211 to the dollar. The pound is 1.160 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,504.98 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Right, so it's just coming up to 39 minutes after 11 o'clock. This is To The Point with me, Nana Akwe, and Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio.
Yes, now, years after Grenfell, as many as 641,000 residents are living in 345,000 properties that remain at risk from a potential fatal fire. That's according to analysis of official housing data. This is, of course, despite the fact that Grenfell now took place years ago, and the government only 2 weeks ago brought in legislation just so that leaseholders didn't have to pay. Leaseholders who own homes with those flammable cladding didn't have to pay. Now it's on to developers.
Well, we can now go live to our London reporter who is at Grenfell Tower. Alice, how have the local residents been marking the anniversary?
Well, I think it's a mixed picture, really. You see a lot of people are wearing green out and about in the area. There's green scarves which are sort of draped over doors to sort of remember people who died in the Grenfell fire. But I think there's also a lot of anger from people 5 years on. And I've seen some people online saying, what do people mean when they say justice for Grenfell? What do they mean by that? What they mean really by it is that it's 5 years on since 72 people lost their lives and not a single person has been prosecuted in relation to the fire. the government has enacted fewer than half the recommendations from the inquiry. And so there are a lot of people who are immensely frustrated by the situation. And again, I've seen some people sort of saying, oh, this is just a London issue. And sadly, it really isn't. What Grenfell fire, what it did, it exposed a fire safety scandal in our housing across the country. And as you were saying in the statistics that you quoted there, that this is affecting hundreds of thousands of people across the country who have suddenly been left with properties that are completely worthless. They can't get them insured, and up until recently, they were the ones who are going to have to foot the bill. Now, Michael Gove has put forward the Building Safety Act, and that has finally, 5 years on from the tragedy, come into law, which in theory should mean that the money will come from the developers to pay to have the cladding removed. Whether that will happen or not is another matter, and I think that's something that a lot of people are frustrated is how slow it's been. I mean, it's only been 2 weeks since the government demanded that the cladding, the specific cladding which we use on Grenfell behind me, could no longer be used. And you think 5 years on, a lot of people would say that is too slow. But saying all that today is not just about anger about Grenfell and fire safety and issues around it that are so important. A lot of today is remembering those who died, and a service has just got underway at Westminster Abbey, and there'll be a number of commemorative events which will also be taking place at the Tower itself, including a walk later this evening to remember the 72 people who lost their lives.
Well, Alice, thank you so much for bringing us that report. Thank you so much. Right, so today marks 40 years since the liberation of the Falkland Islands after the Argentine invasion of 1982.
Yes, well, the battle to win back the British South Atlantic territory lasted 74 days and cost the lives of 255 British servicemen. Nearly 800 were injured.
Events are being held today on the islands and here in the UK to commemorate the end of the war.
Yes, while GBNews' home and security editor Mark White looks at the legacy of the conflict and the effect it had on those who lived on the islands at the time.
It was a huge gamble, dispatching a military task force 8,000 miles into the South Atlantic winter. But for Margaret Thatcher's government, recapturing the Falklands was a political imperative. After 74 days under Argentinian control, the islands were finally liberated on the 14th of June 1982. But not before a heavy toll on both sides, with more than 250 British servicemen killed, almost 650 Argentinian losses, the deaths of 3 islanders, and a local population left deeply traumatised.
This was the kind of kit that really alarmed us because it was very heavy armour, and you can see that there's a turret there with at least a .5-inch machine gun, if not a cannon, and these were grinding through our streets.
Graham Bound was a young photojournalist in April 1982, running the local newspaper in Port Stanley, when he was suddenly faced with the scoop of a lifetime, an invading Argentinian army. Many of the images he captured during those months of conflict are being seen publicly for the first time, part of a fascinating exhibition at the Chatham Naval Dockyard. Images that of course document the military operation, but also the plight of a captive population caught in the middle of a violent struggle to retake the islands.
These Argentines are being rounded up by British troops. You can see, I think, paras or Marines doing their best to round them up and at the same time getting these men to clear up a little bit. I look at these, I can almost still smell them. It was just a complete scene out of hell, frankly.
It was the day of the Vulcan bombing of Stanley Airfield that we heard HMS Hermes trying to get through to the Argentine High Command to offer terms of surrender.
Saul Pitaluga was a teenager at the time of the invasion when he and his father were captured by the Argentinians as they tried to relay a radio message from the British task force to the Argentinian command.
Long story short, they arrested my dad and took him into Stanley for some fairly rigorous questioning, and including having a gun held to his head and the mechanism being clicked to try and sort of extract more information.
By the time the Argentinians surrendered, along with the hundreds killed, the British had lost half a dozen ships and more than 30 aircraft.
4 decades on from the Falklands War, the lessons learned from that conflict have been used to help shape and improve the UK's military. Destroyers and frigates are now much better protected from air and missile strikes, and it's the reason why we now have 2 supercarriers, 3 times bigger than the Falklands-era aircraft carriers, better able to protect the fleet.
As the sacrifices in this pivotal military campaign are remembered, Graham Bound is anxious that the islanders, who also suffered, are not forgotten.
It's a thing quite near to my heart because I actually think that everybody just had to pick themselves up and carry on. I look at these guys, both of whom are now gone, and I'm quite proud of them, and I think they did a really good job. I wish they weren't perhaps a little bit forgotten.
So the 40-year anniversary of the Falklands War.
Yes. Now we've nearly come to the end of the show, and we thought we'd end on a somewhat lighter note, some serious topics we've been covering today. So let's talk about something that we get a lot of views about actually on this show, which is advertising. And people don't seem to like woke adverts, and they seem to see a lot of them on the TV these days. Well, instead of advertising, are we just being served lots of political campaigns by big brands these days? And why are adverts more annoying than ever and always trying to lecture to us?
Well, that's what writer Lionel Shriver seems to think. Writing in The Spectator magazine, she notes that a survey of 2,000 people said that 68% are uncomfortable or unsure about brands promoting fashionable woke causes. I'm sick and tired of that. I can't stand it when they do that.
Yeah, well, is this a case of go woke, go broke? Because she added, quote, these recent moralising commercials hold up a mirror to a preachy party-pooping era. So why aren't commercials funny anymore, or why aren't they a bit risky? They seem to be a bit too safe, don't they?
Remember the fairy washing up liquid one, and it was a woman washing, and it was all that was all. We didn't mind that, but I mean, there were so many adverts that were quite like that. I'm trying to think of any others. The OXO one as well. There was where it was the woman who was preparing the meal for the family. I mean, these days they want to, and there's so many of them. I like seeing a lot of mixed relationships in the ads as well. But somebody did point out that the amount of people of
an excessive amount of diversity, it would seem, on adverts. And what I would say to that is, you know, of course, I don't think most people mind seeing a few black faces on the TV. I mean, you know, if you're watching us, then
you can't get rid of us, we're here.
I'm guessing you don't. But I think it's this idea that people feel like they're being fed a certain narrative, like you must accept these diversity and inclusion fads. You know, now you do see a lot of adverts as well with gay couples. Again,
did you see the John Lewis ad then when was it the boy dancing around in a ballet dress destroying drugs for home insurance? I think they had to scrap it because the insurance would not have covered you had you done that, had your son or child done that.
Well, look, is it go woke, go broke? Let's discuss this with comedian Leo Kearse, who's a regular on GB News.
On my show as well.
Yeah, Leo, thank you for joining us. We need there's some much needed levity, I think, at this point. We've been talking about lots of serious things today. What do you think about woke adverts?
I think this is a serious thing. This is, you know, the sort of cultural changes that are being sort of forced on us. You've got, I don't understand. Like, you know, if somebody's selling a burger to me, I want to know: is it delicious? Is it juicy? Is the lettuce fresh and crisp? Is it less than £8.99? Probably not if we're in London. But instead, Burger King think, you know, what you want to be sold. You know, what you're looking for in a burger is something to do with two men having sex, and it's not really. I just want a burger. I don't need to be lectured on any sort of you know, esoteric sexual practices or anything like that. I'm just interested in the burger.
Yeah, and do you remember I think it was Gillette, which had...
Best a man can
yeah,
get.
because obviously their slogan is the best a man can get. And I think I remember they tried to switch it up and basically say you don't need to be... They tried to say it was a bad thing to have masculine qualities, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then they ended up having to pull that, I think.
Well, it wasn't just that. The way the man did that with the razor, you'd slice your face off if you did that.
Well, yeah, it's toxic masculinity, and they seem to forget that probably the biggest market for Gillette razors is men with hair growing out of their faces. You know what I mean? All right, there's going to be a few, transgender women who want to shave their legs or whatever, but mostly it's just regular, boring blokes with hair growing out of their faces, and they want to trim off. So if you bring out an advert being like, "Oh, you're so evil, you're so bad," people are going to be like, "What on earth? I'm going to get Wilkinson's sword this week." So yeah, it's totally self-defeating. I remember Dove, because you get these companies like Ben and Jerry's and like Dove that try so hard to be woke and appeal to the Guardian readers. And I don't know why, because I got to tell you, those people don't have any money, and if they do have any money, it's getting spent on rubbish stuff, not not fancy brands. So Dove had an advert where women were changing their T-shirts, and every time the T-shirt came off, it was a different woman underneath, and it showed a T-shirt coming off, and then there's a Chinese woman, and then then there's a white woman, and they said, "Oh, that's racist because it's you're removing the T-shirt. It's somehow
Would you
showing
remember,
that."
Leah, do you remember the United Colours of Benetton? That was every United Colours of Benetton. There was somebody who was Asian, somebody who was black, somebody who was white, somebody who was from India. I mean, it was just. I mean, it's
with the Dove advert, all the woke people said, "Oh, this is terrible." It's like, so why do you even try and go for that demographic anyway? If you try and sell stuff to normal people, then they'll buy it. But if you try and sell stuff to woke people, they're always looking for some hole to pick in your advertising campaign, and you can lose them just like that. There's no brand loyalty with woke people.
Well, Leo, your friend Nicola Sturgeon was on earlier. She was talking about breaking up the union. Surprise, surprise. Just briefly, your view on... Did you hear any of it and your views?
I did. My friend was texting me saying how ridiculous it was. I'm sort of at the point. I mean, as a Scot who's naturalised in England and can probably get an English passport, a British passport if Scotland does leave, I'm sort of at the point where, man, if you want to go, stop banging on about it and just pull the trigger and go, and then you can have your isolated little provincial country that economically fails because it's not being supported by Britain anymore, and within 6 months the SNP will be pariahs in Scotland because they'll have dragged Scotland backwards. They'll have ruined, destroyed Scotland economically, socially and culturally. So yeah, just do it. Instead of banging on about it, just do it.
Yeah, just stop going on about it and just do it. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Leo. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Leo Curse. He's on Headliners and also on my shows on Saturday.
Maybe Nike, Just Do It, can partner up with the Scottish Government and do their campaign, since we're talking about woke advertising.
Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah. I'm sick of adverts, they're sort of literally trying to pontificate about a set sort of way of living.
I'd be quite surprised and pleasantly surprised if an advert said, look, buy our products, you'll look more attractive and you'll look better and you'll smell better. That's it. That's the bottom line.
Well, they'll probably be done by the ASA because they're not quite allowed to tell you all those things, but they get around it somehow by talking about all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah, well, let's finish off the show by giving you some other light headlines you might have missed. Look, we have kids. Sometimes you can't take them anywhere. We know what they get up to when they get hold of things in shops and stuff. Well, a mum has shared the story on social media that her 4-year-old son, Jacob, relieved himself in a B&Q display toilet, with the parents being forced to clean up afterwards.
Well, obviously they had to. Caroline Actor was at B&Q in Glastonbury with her partner to buy a washing line. But when her back was turned, Jacob was on top of the display model doing a number 2.
Yes, and of course, as brothers do, he blamed it on his sister. I do wish we had the photos of the dad, because he posted a selfie of himself having to scoop out the poo from the display toilet. But then again, that might be credit to B&Q, because he must have thought it looked so realistic, that their display sets.
Go for it. Well, it probably was the real toilet. It just wasn't connected.
What? I hope B&Q have given them a free kitchen just
Or a free toilet, at least.
Well, yeah.
Although we used to do that to my sister. We say to her, look, there would be like a bottle of Coca-Cola. We'd drink nearly all of it. We're not allowed to do that. And then we'd leave her the last bit and we'd let her finish it. And then when my parents said, who finished it? We'd say, she did.
That's technically true.
It is
technically true. Not
we knew we were
lying
right.
there, are you? Well, now, a little reminder that every Wednesday, including tomorrow, we hand over our show to you. So we ask you to get in touch and let us know what you want us to talk about. So we're not going to be choosing what to talk about. You are, and you can get your ideas in at to the point, actually, a different email, tothepoint@gbnews.uk. That's where you can send all your suggestions for what you want us to talk about.
Right, now the Prime Minister has sent GB News a happy birthday message. He writes, happy birthday a year in. Hired great talent, presented new perspectives and served new audiences.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Boris.
Thank you, Prime
Thank
Minister.
you.
The great talent is obviously in relation to us.
Birthday twins, obviously.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and Freedom Day as well. We were
Freedom
saying
Day, I thought
it was
just me.
it was Freedom Day, Brexit. So yeah.
You never mentioned it.
Yeah, I don't know where
everyone
it
knew
was.
it was mine.
Anyway, that is it from us here at To The Point. But don't go away, because up next is The Briefing with Gloria De Piero. We'll be back tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. Plenty of sunny weather to come over the next few days, actually. It's a bit warmer today and the temperatures will continue to tick up through the rest of this week. Hot for most of us by Friday. All thanks to an area of high pressure, which is dominating, but it isn't completely in control. Around it, weather fronts continue to topple in towards western parts of Scotland, so it's not going to be too sunny here. The Highlands, the Western Isles and Shetland seeing cloud and outbreaks of rain through the rest of today. Small chance of a shower over the Grampians further east across Scotland as well. But for most places, it's dry. Plenty of sunshine across the south. Always a bit more cloud at times over northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Small chance of a shower here as well. Temperatures in the mid to high teens where it stays cloudy, but in the sunshine, warmer than yesterday. Low to mid-20s across the southeast. And through this evening and overnight, we'll continue to see some patchy rain. It may ease off for a time over the Highlands, but then more rain will topple back in through the night. Elsewhere, we see generally clear skies. Temperatures will dip down to maybe 8 or 9 in rural spots. Most towns and cities staying in double figures. And the nights are going to get warmer through the rest of this week, as are the days, with more sunshine to come. Tomorrow it will be a little bit hotter and plenty of sunshine on offer for England, Wales, much of southern and eastern Scotland, most of Northern Ireland too. Again, it'll be the Highlands, the Western Isles and Northern Isles that see the thickest cloud and a bit of showery rain at times. But I say for most it's all about the strong sunshine, with temperatures across northern Britain, high teens, low 20s. Further south, mid to even high 20s across the southeast. The coasts will be cooler, and it'll be cooler with the patchy rain in the northwest. But ticking up day on day, so by Thursday and into Friday in particular, we are likely to see temperatures high 20s, low, even across the southeast on Friday, maybe even the mid-30s. The sun is very strong at the moment, so make sure you put the sunscreen on. Increasing chance of a shower by the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one